Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I do long-haul deliveries, pulling heavy RV trailers across the country for a specialized transport company. My pickup truck gets terrible mileage when I'm hauling a 30-foot trailer, so I've learned to budget carefully for fuel stops. This morning I was starting a 3-day haul from Arizona to Maine. The trailer I was pulling belonged to some wealthy family relocating, and it was packed to the brim with their stuff. My fuel gauge was already dropping fast after just 50 miles. So I knew I'd need to fill up completely at the next station. I pulled into this big truck stop that had 15 pumps spread across the lot. Most of them were busy, but pump number 5 was open, so I maneuvered my rig over there. Parking with a trailer that size takes skill, and I had to swing wide to get positioned correctly without blocking other customers. Since I knew I'd be pumping close to 40 gallons, I decided to head inside and prepay. It's just easier that way, plus I wanted to grab a cold drink for the road. I walked up to the counter and told the cashier I needed to prepay for pump 5 and asked him to put about $140 on there. He agreed and asked if I needed anything else. I pointed to one of the sodas in the cooler behind him and asked for that too. The whole transaction took maybe 3 minutes. I got my receipt and headed back outside, already planning my route for the next leg of the trip. But when I got back to my truck, there was this woman on the other side of pump 5 trying to jam the gas nozzle into her little sedan. She was really struggling with it, yanking the hose around like it wasn't reaching properly. I asked her what she was doing and she told me she was trying to pump the gas she paid for, but I had parked my truck in front of her pump. I looked around confused. Her car was definitely on the opposite side of the pump from where I positioned my truck. The nozzle she was trying to use was clearly the one meant for my side. I told her I thought there was a misunderstanding and explained that I had prepaid for this pump, and she was trying to use my side of it. She got angry and said she was there first, claiming I had seen her there and decided to block her in so I could steal her gas. I hit the emergency stop button on the pump to make sure nothing dangerous happened. This woman was getting more agitated by the second, and I could tell this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. I pulled out my receipt and showed it to her, explaining that I had just paid for $140 worth of gas on pump 5. But she barely looked at it and said she didn't care about my fake receipt. She demanded that I move my truck right now so she could get her gas. She started accusing me of probably printing the receipt at home and said she knew people like me who tried to scam gas stations. By now her voice was getting loud enough that other customers were starting to stare. I saw a couple of people at nearby pumps shaking their heads at the scene. I suggested we go inside and ask the clerk to sort this out, explaining that they would have records of who paid for what. But she refused to go anywhere and threatened to call the police if I didn't move my truck. I told her that actually sounded like a good idea and suggested we call them. That seemed to surprise her for a second, but then she got even angrier. She said fine, they would arrest me for theft and drunk driving, claiming she could smell alcohol on me from here. I almost laughed at that one. I don't drink at all when I'm working and I'd only had coffee that morning, but she was already pulling out her phone and dialing. A few minutes later, I saw the store manager walking over with a concerned look on his face. He asked what the problem was, and Karen immediately launched into her accusations, saying I had parked in front of her pump and was trying to steal the gas she paid for. She also claimed I'd been drinking. The manager asked me to tell him what happened. I explained the whole situation, showed him my receipt, and pointed out how my truck was properly positioned at pump 5. The manager nodded and said he'd already called the police just to be safe. Karen responded by saying good and demanding they arrest me right now. The manager told her we needed to wait for the officers to sort this out. The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Karen kept ranting about how I was a thief and a drunk, while I just stood there waiting. Other customers were having to walk around us to get to their cars, and I felt bad about the whole circus. When the police finally arrived, there were 2 officers. The first one was this older guy who looked like he'd seen everything, and the younger one was taking notes. The older officer asked what was going on, and Karen immediately launched into her story, talking so fast she was barely making sense. She claimed I'd been stalking her, that I'd followed her to the gas station, and that I was part of some elaborate gas theft ring. She kept saying I'd been drinking and told them to look at my eyes. She claimed the receipt was fake and suggested I probably had a whole printer in my truck. The older officer told her to calm down and asked me to tell him my side. I handed over my receipt and explained everything step by step. The officer looked at the timestamp and the amount, then walked over to examine how my truck was positioned. The younger officer observed that the truck was on the correct side of pump 5 and noted that if she had paid for this pump, her car should be where my truck was positioned. The older officer suggested we go check the security cameras and talk to the clerk. We all went inside and the store manager pulled up the footage on his computer. You could clearly see me walking in, paying at the counter, and walking back out. Then it showed Karen arriving after I'd already started walking back to my truck. The clerk said he remembered me and that I had prepaid for $140 on pump 5. He explained that Karen had come in about 5 minutes later and prepaid for $20 on pump 12. The older officer asked about pump 12 and the clerk said it was on the other side of the lot. Karen said that was impossible and claimed she had specifically said pump 5, but the clerk contradicted her, saying she had definitely said 12 and that he remembered because she had complained about having to walk so far. The officers looked at each other and I could tell they were starting to lose patience with Karen. The younger officer told her the evidence was pretty clear and explained that she had paid for pump 12, not pump 5. Karen started shouting that we were all in on it and called it a conspiracy. She accused me of bribing everyone. That's when things got really weird. Karen started accusing the police of being corrupt, the store clerk of being my accomplice, and me of being some kind of master criminal. She was waving her arms around and getting more hysterical by the minute. The older officer warned her that she needed to calm down or they were going to have a problem. She demanded that he test me for drunk driving right away and told him to make me walk in a straight line. The officer looked at me and shrugged, asking if I would mind doing a quick field sobriety test just to put this to rest. I told him no problem. I did the whole thing, walking in a line, touching my nose, standing on one foot. It was easy since I was completely sober. Karen started screaming that I was faking it and claimed I had practiced. She said that wasn't how drunk people walk. The younger officer had heard enough and told her that was it. He told her she was under arrest for filing a false police report and disturbing the peace. Karen asked what he meant and said he couldn't arrest her because she was a victim. They put handcuffs on her and she was still screaming about conspiracy theories and gas theft rings. The officer explained that since she'd accused me of stealing over $100 worth of gas, it was actually a felony charge she'd made falsely. He told her that the attempted theft charge was worth more than $500, which made filing a false report about it a serious offense. Karen started yelling that this was America and she had rights. She demanded to speak to their manager. The younger officer simply told her she could speak to a lawyer instead. They loaded her into the patrol car, still yelling about how the whole system was corrupt. The older officer came back over to me and shook his head. He said he'd been on the force for 23 years and still saw new things every day. He apologized for all the trouble. I told him no worries and said I appreciated them sorting it out. After they left, the store manager came out with a free root beer and apologized for the whole mess. He said Karen had been in before causing problems with other customers over petty stuff. He mentioned she had tried to return a half-eaten sandwich last month, claiming they sold her moldy bread when the sandwich was fine and she just wanted her money back. I finally got my truck fueled up and back on the road. Back in February 2009, I was living the classic broke college student life. I was 20 years old, pulling double duty with a full course load and a full-time job at a retail store. Money was tight, stress was high, and sleep was basically a luxury I couldn't afford. I've been working retail for 3 years by then, which meant I gotten pretty good at reading people and talking my way through tough situations. Little did I know those skills would come in handy for something way more intense than dealing with difficult customers. It started on what seemed like a normal Tuesday morning. I just finished my chemistry lab at college and was rushing to get to work. The lab had been messy that day, with everyone scrambling around trying to finish their experiments before time ran out. I grabbed my stuff, threw my purse over my shoulder, and headed to my car. Halfway to work, I reached for my wallet to grab some gas money, and my heart dropped. It wasn't there. I pulled over and tore through my entire purse, checking every pocket twice. Nothing. I tried to think back to when I'd last used it. That morning for coffee, definitely. But after that, I couldn't remember. Something in my gut told me this wasn't just a case of misplacing it. I had this sinking feeling that someone had taken it. So I did what any paranoid person would do. I called my credit card company right away. The customer service rep put me on hold while she checked recent transactions. When she came back, her tone was different. She told me there had been a charge from about an hour ago at Murphy's Bar and Grill for $237. I told her I'd never even been to that place, and she immediately marked it as fraudulent activity and canceled my card. Most people would have stopped there, filed a police report, and moved on with their lives. But I was broke, stressed, and honestly pretty angry that someone thought they could just steal from me and get away with it. That wallet had cost me $50, which might not sound like much, but when you're living on ramen noodles and hoping your card doesn't break down, $50 is a lot. I called the police first like a responsible citizen. The local police told me I needed to call the reservation police since my college was on tribal land. So I called them. The reservation police officer explained that since I couldn't be sure the theft happened on campus, it wasn't really their jurisdiction either. When I asked what I was supposed to do, he told me to file a report with whoever I wanted, but honestly warned me that these cases rarely go anywhere. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. 3 years of retail had taught me that if you're polite but persistent, people will usually help you out. So I called Murphy's Bar and Grill directly. I explained to the woman who answered that someone had stolen my credit card and used it at their restaurant about an hour ago, and I was wondering if she could help me figure out who it was. She sounded sympathetic right away and asked for my name and the last 4 digits of my card. I gave her the information and she put me on hold. When she came back, she sounded excited. She told me she was actually the one who had served that table and remembered because the tip was huge. Like, weirdly huge. The guy had said his wife was treating him to lunch, and that's why the card had a woman's name. When I asked if she could tell me anything else about them, she gave me way more information than she probably should have. She explained that there were 3 guys total. 2 of them had paid for their own food and drinks with their own cards, but the 3rd guy, the one with my card, had paid for everything else and left this massive tip. She said she thought it was weird at the time. She gave me the name from one of the other credit cards. I could tell she felt bad for me and wanted to help. After I hung up, I realized I had a pretty solid lead. The server had given me the name of one of the innocent guys who'd been there, so I did something that probably wasn't entirely legal. I used my work computer to look up that name in our customer database. Bingo. I found a phone number. A few days later, I made the most nerve-wracking call of my life. My heart was pounding when I dialed the number. I told him I was a private investigator looking into a credit card fraud case, and that I believed he was present when the crime occurred at Murphy's Bar and Grill on Tuesday. There was a long pause. He said he didn't know what I was talking about. I explained that I had records showing he paid for his meal with his credit card while dining with someone who used a stolen card for a large purchase. I warned him that if he didn't cooperate, he could be considered an accomplice. He told me he needed to talk to his lawyer before saying anything. I assured him that if he cooperated and provided me with the name and contact information of the person he was with, he wouldn't face any legal trouble. He was quiet for a long time. I could practically hear him thinking. Finally, he gave me a name but said he barely knew the guy and they'd met through a mutual friend. He told me the guy's name was Jake, but he didn't have his number. It wasn't much, but it was something. I thanked him and hung up feeling like a real detective. Without a phone number, I turned to social media. This was 2009, so social media stalking wasn't as sophisticated now, but people were still pretty careless about their privacy settings. I found a profile for someone with the right name, who lived in the area. His profile was private, but back then people could post these things called banners that were basically status updates everyone could see. I scrolled through his recent posts and found something that made my blood run cold. He'd posted about being worried about an upcoming chemistry lab test, the same chemistry lab test I was taking, the same chemistry lab I'd just been in when my wallet disappeared. I printed out his profile picture and that status update and walked straight to my chemistry teacher's office. I told him I thought I knew who stole my wallet from his lab and explained the whole situation while he looked at the printout. He said he remembered the guy and that he sits at the corner of my table during labs. Everything clicked into place. During our lab experiments, everyone's bags and purses were scattered around the tables while we focused on our work. He would have had the perfect opportunity to grab my wallet while I was distracted with test tubes and chemicals. My teacher was outraged. He told me he'd call campus security and that we could have them come to the next lab session and arrest him there. When I asked if he'd really do that, he said absolutely. Stealing from fellow students was unacceptable. The plan was set. Campus security would come to our next lab, identify the guy using the photo I printed, and arrest him discreetly. But when I did a little more digging, I found out something that made this whole thing even better. This guy was already on academic probation for some other incident. Getting arrested would probably get him kicked out of school entirely. Lab day arrived and I was practically vibrating with anticipation. I sat at my usual spot and tried to act normal while watching the door. About 20 minutes into class, 2 campus security officers walked in and spoke quietly with my teacher. My teacher pointed toward the corner of my table, and I followed his gaze to see the guy from the photo. He was bent over his experiment, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. The security officers walked over casually. They asked if he was Jake, and when he confirmed and asked why, they told him he needed to come with them. His face showed pure confusion that slowly turned to panic when he realized what was happening. Everyone in the lab stopped what they were doing and stared when they escorted him out. He kept looking back at our table, and I'm pretty sure he figured out it was me who'd caught him. The security officer announced that he was under arrest for credit card fraud and theft. The whole class was dead silent when they led him away in handcuffs. I felt this incredible rush of satisfaction. All those hours of detective work had paid off. Later, I found out from the reservation police that they were impressed with my investigation skills. The officer told me they'd seen a lot of theft cases, but most people just file a report and hope for the best. He said I actually solved the thing myself, but the story gets even better. A few weeks later, I started receiving checks in the mail. Tiny checks for $2 each, coming from the county jail. Apparently, the guy had been sentenced to make restitution for what he'd stolen, and they were garnishing whatever money he made from his prison job. Every 2 weeks, another $2 check would show up in my mailbox. It took months to add up to the $50 my wallet had cost, but each check felt like a little victory. I'd caught this guy, got him arrested in front of the whole class, and now he was literally paying for what he'd done $2 at a time. I never saw him around campus again after that. My family has been in firefighting for generations. My grandfather, dad, and uncles all volunteered at the local fire company. When a few old fire trucks went up for sale, my grandfather bought them and fixed them up as a hobby. The problem was, he lived in a townhouse with just enough room to park them in his backyard, but no space for a proper storage building. That's where my dad's property came in. He had bought several acres of what used to be farmland, and we decided to build a barn there to store the fire trucks. The land didn't have a house on it yet, just woods and open space. When my dad decided he wanted to build our family home in a wooded section of this property, right next to an established neighborhood, he had to get the land rezoned from agricultural to residential. Usually this is pretty straightforward, just a court hearing to make sure no one has legitimate objections. But apparently, one more neighbor was too much for some people in that neighborhood. A bunch of them showed up to the hearing with the dumbest reasons you can imagine for why our land should stay empty. This one woman, who I'll call Karen, stood up and suggested the land would be much better if it was left for horses to run around in. Nobody in that neighborhood owned horses. Nobody in our entire town owned horses. Plus, there wasn't even enough land to legally keep horses on it anyway. After 2 weeks of this nonsense, the court finally rezoned our land and construction began. When we started cutting down trees, we moved the fire trucks onto the property where the barn would eventually go. My dad built up a big pile of all the cut wood to burn it. Being a firefighter himself, he called the fire department first to let them know what he was doing. They told him it was fine since he was in the right zone where no permit was needed. So he lit the pile. That's when Karen came walking over, phone in her hand, screaming at my dad. She yelled that she was calling the fire department on him right away. My dad told her that he was with the fire department himself and pointed out that there were 2 fire trucks right there just in case we needed them. She kept screaming, so my dad called the fire department again. He asked if anyone had called to report a fire at his property that day. They told him no, they hadn't received any fire reports at all. My dad hung up and turned back to Karen. He called her a liar and told her to go back to her house and stop bothering us. We had a few more run-ins like this while we were moving in, but nothing stopped us. Eventually, we got the barn built and stored the trucks properly. Things calmed down, and we actually became good friends with about half the neighborhood. About a year later, another fire department my grandfather worked with needed to sell one of their old trucks. It was this massive Ford Louisville model, basically a semi-truck with a fire truck body on it. They needed somewhere to store it until they found a buyer, so my grandfather offered our barn. Part of the deal was that we had to drive the truck around once a week to keep it from sitting too long and getting damaged. Around this same time, Karen started having yard sales constantly. We noticed people were parking on our lawn during these sales. Not just a tire on the grass, I'm talking about people using our entire front yard like it was a parking lot. We kept asking people to move their cars since it was our property, but it kept happening. Then we found out why. Karen was telling people to park on our lawn. We put up a sign that said no parking in big black letters. For a while, people stopped using our yard as a parking lot. Then one day, Karen walked over, ripped our sign off its post, pulled the whole post out of the ground, and threw it into the woods behind our house. My parents were furious. The very next day, people started parking on our lawn again. That's when my dad came up with his plan. He put the sign back up. Then it was time for the weekly drive of that big Ford Louisville truck. My dad had been driving trucks like this since he got his license, so he knew exactly what he was doing. He drove to one end of the neighborhood, turned around and started heading back. This truck had a 10-speed manual transmission. On that half-mile long stretch of road, he got that diesel engine up to 8th gear, then waited until he was almost at Karen's house before downshifting. By the time he reached her property line, the truck was in 3rd gear. All that downshifting made that diesel engine roll serious black smoke, and the exhaust was pointed straight at her yard sale on a day with almost no wind. The smell was absolutely terrible. Diesel exhaust stinks really bad when it's rolling coal like that. Within a few days, everything left from Karen's yard sale was packed up in garbage bags sitting next to her trash can. She might have tried calling the cops, but what was she going to say? That her neighbor's fire truck drove by and the exhaust ruined her yard sale? I don't think the cops would have taken that seriously. After this, Karen not only left us alone completely, but she stopped having yard sales altogether. Since she had been horrible to us the entire time we lived in that neighborhood, we cost her hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars she could have made from that yard sale and all the future ones she never had. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.